In this After Effects tutorial, we're going to be looking at keyframing, both temporal keyframing, how to edit keyframes, and spatial keyframes, and time interpolation. That might all sound a little bit jargony for now, but hopefully at the end it's going to make loads of sense. So, keyframes in general are sort of little notes of information throughout the timeline that tell an object what to do, and essentially and eventually will create an animation. So I've got this object, it's a cloud, and the first thing we're going to look at is temporal keyframes, which are keyframes that have no spatial information added to them. So that will be things like rotations, opacities, rescaling, things like that. So in my layers panel, I've got my little composition, temporal keyframes, and I've got my layer cloud, which I'm going to animate. I'm going to use the drop-down menu, which is going to show me my transforms, and I'm going to use that drop-down menu, which will bring up the 5 different transforms I have to play with immediately. The one I'm going to play with today is scale. I'm just going to make sure this little blue capped timeliner is at the very beginning of my animation, or my timeline for that matter. And to set my first keyframe, as long as I am happy with the value of 100%, so when I talk about values, I'm talking about these blue numbers next to each transform. And at the moment, my object is scaled 100%, and I'm happy with that. So to start and create my first keyframe, I'm going to select the stopwatch. We can see the stopwatch is now blue, and the keyframe that I'm hovering over is underneath my timeline, and it is a diamond-shaped keyframe. You might have noticed over here as well that now suddenly this is not blue, and that only turns blue when your time slider is hovering over that particular keyframe. So I'm going to move the slider along somewhere in the center, and I'm going to change the value to make new information, so that from keyframe 1 or keyframe A to keyframe B, there will be an animation or a transform happening. A few ways I can change this value. I can simply click it and type in a new value. Or I can click and hold the click down and sort of drag that object to a value that I find visually happy, if I didn't already know what that value might be. Then I'm going to move the slider, and essentially I could type in a new value again, but just so that you understand and start to get to grips how easy it is to edit keyframes, I'm going to select that first keyframe. So that first one is in blue again. I'm going to select Command C or Control C if you are on a PC and not a Mac. Just double checking that time slide is at the end, and I'm going to put Command V or Control V to paste that first keyframe at the end of the animation. So we can copy and paste keyframes really simply. If I was unhappy with the placement, I could just do backspace and it will disappear. But I do want that there. Essentially, I've also created a seamless loop. So if I bring this time slider to the very beginning and press spacebar for play, we'll see that that cloud seamlessly grows and shrinks back to the original shape. Another way we can edit and play with our keyframes before moving on to spatial keyframes is if I was happy with the ratio or the rate of speed between each keyframe, but I wanted the entire animation to go faster nonetheless, I want to pick up all the keyframes. So if I pick up the word scale or select the word scale, see how each of my keyframes have been highlighted in blue now. I'm going to select, or before I select the last keyframe, I'm going to hold down Alt and then hold and click and hold that last keyframe to bring them all tighter together on the timeline. So it's kept the same spatial value between each keyframe, but now if I press play, that transform will happen a lot quicker. And it's exactly the same process if I wanted to stretch the time back out. I'm holding down Alt and clicking and holding the click down to then drag those keyframes out. Super. And there's nothing stopping me now picking up rotation and start layering different types of transforms on top of one another to create a more complex animation. Instead of doing that, however, I'm going to pick up my spatial keyframes and we're going to have a look at movement and positioning. So this time we're actually not working with temporal, we're going to work with spatial, and these clouds are going to go from one end of the screen to another. The reason I have two clouds is because I also want to have a little look at time interpolation. And what that means is how an object moves from one keyframe to another, because as we've already seen, it's one single rate of speed. So let's see that in a visual way again. I'm going to pick up, got them both named as cloud 2. So I'm going to hit enter and just rename this to cloud 1. So I'm going to drop down the menu, drop down transform, and this time I'm picking up position, and my time slider is very nicely there at the beginning. So I'm going to select the stopwatch to start off the whole animation process again and place that first keyframe. I'm going to move the slider all the way to the other end of the animation, and here I've got two values. I've got my horizontal and my vertical values that how I can manipulate the cloud. So I'm just going to drag the cloud from one edge of the screen to another. There we go. So I've got two diamond keyframes, which basically say that my cloud is going from one end of the screen to another in a linear, my bad. In a linear rate of speed. So bear with me, it's just rendering, and there we go, so we can see it in real time now. And it sort of begins and ends very abruptly. So let's do the same for the cloud beneath. In fact, I'm going to use that other cloud as an example. Bring that time slider to the beginning, select position, and move the animation ends about there. I'm just going to move that cloud to the same position. Brilliant. So we can agree that those clouds are both moving at the same rate of speed from one side of the composition to another. However, this time I'm going to select position on cloud 2, so I've picked up both of my keyframes. I'm going to right click the keyframes. I'm going down to keyframe assistant, where I'm going to pick up an easy ease. Now there are two other time interpolations here as well, an ease in and an ease out, which do the same thing but will affect only one keyframe. So I'm going to select easy ease. There we go. And this time when I press play and we get into real time, there we go, you might be able to start to see that actually my second cloud is storming out of the keyframe and roving into the next keyframe at a more organic rate of speed. So it's coming out quicker to then slowing in before it reaches the next keyframe. So you're going to get more organic movements when using different eases or easy eases if you know that the object you are using is only jumping between two keyframes, or it's going to slowen and shorten its speed, or shorten and slowen its speed in that one transform. Okay. And finally, before I move on, I want to have a look at positioning in keyframes. You may have noticed that there is a motion path leading from one keyframe to another in our footage panel. And on those motion paths, there are these small little dots hanging on either side of these two key values. So at the moment we've got a straight line, a straight positioning, and what these little circles allow us to do, if you select and click them, is they reveal themselves to be Bezier handles, which some of you may notice or recognize even from Adobe Illustrator. If you click and manipulate those, you can start editing how that motion path is read. So it doesn't need to read as one whole straight line, and you also don't need to put in hundreds of different keyframes to get this wiggly sort of motion effect, but you can use those very simple Bezier handles that live on either keyframe. So before my laptop dies, that is some simple keyframing effects that will help you start putting your animations together. There'll be another tutorial where it takes some of these motion path effects and some of those time interpolations into more detail. I hope that was useful. Thank you very much.